One of the problems with the county asylums and the borough asylums was that it didn't take very long before they became full up because of growing numbers of admissions and because some people weren't being discharged, there'd be an accumulating number of long-term patients.
The wards were not subdivided at all. They were overcrowded as well, so that there were just rows of beds down each side. In fact, sometimes when there was a shortage of beds, the beds were pushed so close together the patients had to climb in over the end.
And it was an elderly ward. There were older patients there, 65 plus, you know. And I went into the ward and there were beds lined along, perhaps 20 beds in this one big room, and a rat ran over the bed. I mean, it was shocking.
Medication was already substantially used. ECT was in common use on all the acute psychiatric units. Lobotomies were performed on site at the hospital. We still had some of the equipment that they used, which was incredibly crude.
People who'd migrated within the country, who migrated from the country to the town or from small town to the city, were more liable to be admitted to an asylum.
Birmingham had to look outside itself for people to fill the jobs that were being created. Birmingham was the industrial heartland of the UK.
When I was coming here, personally, when I was coming through the airport, I experienced a lot of racism from when I was coming from Yemen. A lot of racism, a lot of assault, verbal and physical.
I had experiences whereby I would say find my car scratched, my tyres flattened on a weekly basis kind of thing, or my house door kicked in.
As much as the mental health stigma is slowly starting to be broken, it's still very much there within the Asian communities and very much there in the Bengali communities. So it's like there's no such thing as mental health. There's just something wrong with you. There's not an understanding of mental health issues.
It's important to address discrimination because we can't have large parts of our society feeling isolated and disengaged. That's just not acceptable.
It is ridiculous that you can't talk openly about having clinical depression or schizophrenia or whatever. And yes, the bill is one step along the road to creating the situation where that stigma no longer exists.
Do you put something on your CV? Do you tell an employer that you have suffered or had problems, or that you're a carer? And so I think it was important. We had a number of members of Parliament who said, you know, I have had issues in the past, or I'm still dealing with them. And given all the emails I got afterwards and letters, people said it was really encouraging and refreshing to see members of Parliament able to stand up and talk about their own personal experiences.
For years I've talked about mental health and I've never actually admitted to my own experiences, and I felt that the time was right to stand up and say, listen, it's not just something I'm interested in from an academic point of view, a political point of view, it's something that I've lived with day in and day out for over 3 decades.
Then the voice starts, if you don't get rid of that photograph, your child will die. And you fight those voices for a couple of 3 hours. You know that you really shouldn't give in to them because they shouldn't be there and it ain't gonna happen, but in the end, you ain't gonna risk your child, so you give in to the voices and then you feel pretty miserable about life.
There was an emphasis on communal living. So unlike other parts of the hospital where food was delivered, people were expected to prepare food and look after themselves.
The history of the asylums was actually to save people from what was happening in society to the mentally ill back in the 1800s.
In the illness, if you can communicate, it will work better in the medication, because I believe the biggest improvement in mental health for a decade, I believe, is talking therapies.
I'm a firm believer in terms of my ethics and the way I practice in the psychosocial model. And that to me means taking the whole view of the person. You know, the medical model, it's set people up to fail in some ways, in that in order to get help, you need a diagnosis.
I think there needs to be a real change in the approach towards mental health from a younger age.
Sometimes when we have clients or patients in the surgeries who come across that we know them from the community, but as soon as you get to know them or they get to know you, they don't want to know you anymore, because obviously you might go back into the community, people might know about it, so they won't come to the sessions anymore.
I think some of the reasons for discrimination are people's lack of knowledge. They just simply don't know that perhaps some of the things that they might be saying or doing might be perceived by somebody who's experiencing a mental health problem as stigmatising.
And it was the same thing even in the halls of residence, you know, my door being kicked in. Somebody was sharing the toilet with, the kitchen with, and kicked my door in when I was away, and who could it have been? It could be anybody who I'm interacting with at that point in time. So it was quite heavy.